We have an interesting case before us. Ms. Rosen is a high school teacher with leukemia in desperate need of a bone marrow transplant. She reached out to the Tikva Foundation, which was able to find one match, an anonymous donor who we will refer to as Michael. Michael, a 45-year-old lawyer from Washington, had previously agreed to undergo the procedure, but has recently backed out due to the 8% fatality risk that the procedure entails. He has consented to allow us, the YULA Girls High School Beit, to decide whether or not he must complete the procedure.
Based on the halachic sources that come to mind, I think that Michael must be obligated to donate his bone marrow. Consider the verse in Vayikra, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand idly by in the blood of your fellow. This is one of the quintessential values in Judaism. It says directly in Vayikra that one cannot just stand by and watch your friend suffer. So if he doesn't donate his bone marrow, Michael will be transgressing this obligation from the Torah.
That makes sense. Also consider when the Rambam said about this verse. He maintains that anyone who has the ability to save someone else but doesn't is breaking this law.
Even the Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat 426.1 implies that if Michael doesn't put himself in harm's way to save Miss Rosen, then he is violating this commandment.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't believe that we can jump so quickly to the conclusion that Michael must donate his bone marrow. Consider the following anecdote in the Talmud Bavli. It says that if two men are traveling through the desert, dying of thirst, and there's only one jug of water, the water should be taken only by one person, so as to ensure that they both do not die. Based on this story, wouldn't it make sense to say that Michael should not donate his bone marrow, as it would put them both at risk of death, whereas otherwise he can make sure that at least one of them lives?
That doesn't apply to Miss Rosen's case because Michael's risk of death is not definite, unlike the man in the story who has almost no chance of survival if he shares his water. Michael only faces 8% risk, unlike Miss Rosen, whose chance of death remains very high if Michael does not donate his bone marrow.
True. Also, according to the Hagahot Maimoniyot 1:14, Masvik afilu lehachnis atzmo b'safek sachana chayav, meaning that someone has to put themselves at a chance of harm to save someone from certain death. In essence, if someone faces a very high risk of death and the donor's chance is small, the donor is obligated to donate.
So are you saying that Michael would be compelled to donate his bone marrow based on the Hagahot Maimoniyot? Look at the Magen Avraham. It clearly states that someone is allowed to run away from fatal risk, even though it would put someone else in pain. Therefore, Michael is obviously permitted to refrain from donating, as he is halachically allowed to flee life-threatening harm.
But in this case, Miss Rosen won't just be experiencing pain. Her life is at stake. So the source is completely inapplicable, as these situations are very different.
Contemporary rabbis Rav Mordechai Willing and Rav David Blake maintain that he needs to donate as well, as they rule that if a specific person's blood or bone marrow is necessary for a critical life-saving transfusion, they are required to undergo the procedure.
The idea of Chola Mesukin B'fanenu states almost the exact same idea. That in a case where a specific individual's marrow is needed to save someone and there are no other available matches, the match is obligated to donate.
Okay, I just have one last counter to your argument. The Migdal Oz says, Gam Yisurin Kashim Umarim Nir'eh She'eno Tzarich Lispol Bishvil Hatzat Chavero, meaning, a Jew doesn't have to try to save a non-Jew if it's going to put the Jew in harm's way. Doesn't this principle seem applicable in this case as well?
But here, both parties are Jewish, so the Migdal Oz is not relevant to our case. Rather, the Beit Din should consider Beit Yosef's opinion, which, to paraphrase, says that if a donor is not in certain danger, they are allowed, even obligated, to save one in need. According to the Jewish law, all lives are equal, and we cannot give one priority over another. Therefore, we must work to save others to the best of our abilities, such as by giving bone marrow.
I see where you're coming from. Now that I think about it more, Rav Schachter's story of the cholera outbreak is probably applicable as well. In this instance, people entered the infected areas in order to save the diseased people, even though they themselves risked catching the lethal illness. So too in this case, Michael should probably risk a chance of harm in order to save Miss Rosen. However, I would also like to point out that if Michael is capable of finding a suitable replacement for the procedure, he should be allowed to do so. This directly follows the reasoning of Talmud Bavli, Sanhedrin 73a.
I agree, and I'm glad you're finally understanding our view. The Or HaChaim should help convince you as well, as it says, Shehu mechayev lispol sa'ar kedei shelo yaharog chavero, that someone is required to endure immense pain in order to save a life. Well, of course we understand that this is a very trying time for Michael. We cannot give up on Miss Rosen for Michael's 8% chance. Despite the pain that this transfusion may cause, the fear of pain does not take precedence over a human life. However, because the YULA Girls High School Beit does understand the pain and financial loss that Michael will be enduring, we should require Ms. Rosen to compensate Michael for his trouble.
That sounds fair. According to the Rosh Sanhedrin 8.2, Vanitzul chayad lifroa lematzil masha hotzi. This statement rules that someone who has been saved by another is obligated to compensate the rescuer for any expenses they lost in the rescue. Since, if we obligate Michael to save Ms. Rosen, Michael will be losing money, I completely agree that Ms. Rosen must pay him back. But how can we quantify an exact amount?
How about using the source in Bava Kama 8.1? The source reads, one who wounds his friend is obligated to pay 5 things: damages, suffering, medical expenses, time off from work, and embarrassment. While Michael has not been subjugated to any embarrassment, he has faced damages, suffering, medical bills, and lost wages. Therefore, I believe that as the YULA Girls High School Beit Din, we must obligate Ms. Rosen to compensate for these 4 things.
I agree that this principle applies to the case, but I think we need to make one important distinction. I don't think that donating bone marrow and incurring financial losses because of the donation is quite the same thing as Michael suffering damages at the hands of Ms. Rosen. However, I still think we can use the case of one who is reimbursed for damages inflicted upon them to help us determine the different areas in which Michael should be compensated by Ms. Rosen. Are we in agreement?
That sounds fair to me. Michael should be obligated to go forward with the donation, but I also think that he should be compensated for his losses.
Agreed. Overall, the YULA Girls High School Beit Din has decided to obligate Michael to donate his bone marrow, primarily based on the principle of lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. However, we also require Ms. Rosen to compensate Michael for damages, suffering, medical bills, and lost wages. We hope that all of the involved parties gain insight from our ruling, and we wish them the best in their time of need.